Hello, I'm Melissa Matarazzo, a leader coach with Studer Education, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this 9 Principles in Action webinar that is titled Prioritize to Achieve Small Wins. If you are watching this webinar live, we encourage you to consider using the chat or Q&A to engage with members of our team during the presentation. If you are watching this webinar in a recorded session, feel free to reach out to us with any questions that you may have from the session. I'm lucky enough to have been a leader coach for nearly 8 years with Huron Studer Education, and I will be your guide for some reflection, learning, planning, and maybe even some doing as we are together today. For this session, prioritizing to achieve small wins, I'm welcoming you now and grateful and impressed that you have chosen to spend about 30 minutes thinking about how to get to those small wins, particularly in any time of challenge and change as we are all in. I'll start with some reflection so that you can be thinking about real life situations and scenarios that are going on for you right now. And that way, I think you'll be more prepared to take action by the time we conclude. We'll talk a little bit about why small wins are so important and how they help sustain us. And then we'll look at a number of different ways that you might think about creating priorities on a long-term or short-term kind of basis, and give you some options for how that might work best for you. Everything that we do in our 9 Principles in Action webinars will be aligned to one or more of our 9 principles for organizational excellence. These are our guiding principles and our foundational core purpose in the work that we do with organizations is to bring these to life and to lead through them ourselves. Today, I think I would suggest that our work on prioritizing to achieve small wins is most closely related to Principle 2, which is around measuring the important things. Those small wins are measures of success. 4, which is developing leaders to develop people. So I hope if you're here, you'll find this to be an opportunity to learn and grow your leadership, regardless of role. And then 7, aligning our behaviors with goals and values. So we all have goals that guide us in a long or short-term way. And part of what we'll do today is talk about how do we keep our behavior aligned to those goals, even in the midst of the daily whirlwind, as Stephen Covey refers to it. So hopefully 2, 4, and 7 will be significant as you listen to and leave from today. The quote on screen actually comes from December of 2020. And yet, I think it could really apply as we sit wherever and at whatever time you feel you may be participating in this. And I think it's particularly true in the fall of 2021. With that feeling, embracing and surrounding us, I think I want to just pause and do that reflection I mentioned. I want to know, what is it that is helping or making you feel tired or frustrated or like you're not achieving wins? Because there must be something going on that encouraged you to sign up and attend this session. So I'm going to give you a minute. And in that minute, I'm going to encourage you to think about your last week, last 3 weeks, whatever window you're considering, and write down the top 5 things you're spending the most time on these days at work. Doesn't matter if you want to be spending time on those things or not, but where is the majority of your time going currently? As an example, I'll share with you mine. So in my work as a coach and a leader of our team, you can see on the screen 5 things that are taking my time, where I'm spending my time in the current month. And as you look through them, no judgment about which are more important or less important, but that's what I've been working on here right now. I'll give you a moment for you to do your own reflection, jot it down, those 5 things, because we're going to be working with them for a bit. Okay. Hopefully they came to you quickly. If you ended up with 6 or 4, that's fine. The idea was to be really getting a sense of what's going on for you right now so that we can use that to determine where you'd like to prioritize. As a next step, take that list of 5 or so items. And as you think about those items and you think about your goals, perhaps put them in order, 1 through 5, of how significantly they can impact your goal achievement. So in other words, number 1 would be the item that is most significant to achieving your monthly or annual goals, leading down to 5, which would be the least impactful of the things you're spending your time on. In my case, I actually, and perhaps this will happen to you too, I had actually put them in that order, just naturally by the way I listed them out. So take a moment to think through which of these has more or less potential impact on achieving your goals. Now, we're going to move on to one next step, which is that maybe when you looked at that list of 5, there were things that aren't on there that you really think should be, that you would like to be spending time on because they will help you achieve your goals. But the reality is, in recent days, weeks, etc., they haven't made it to the list of where you're spending your most time. That's certainly possible. And I'd encourage you to think about what are those next few, not too many, that might be very significant, weren't on the list, but could help you achieve your goals. In my list, as you can see on the left, there are the first 2 items are my most important jobs, supporting the people that we work with. The next 2 items are supporting the team that I have the pleasure to lead. And the last one is connected to some transitions occurring within the operational aspects of our organization that I help with. Now, what I don't have on there is what you see on the right. And you can see some of those things are more about how I could be doing the work more systematically or with greater delegation, or I should be looking further out to develop plans, excuse me, to continue to be successful in the items that are already listed. So with your own list, if there's anything missing that you really think you would like to be spending time on at a significant amount, go ahead and add those. So you'd have up to 7 to 10 items of potential current or other priorities. I don't know about you, but as I made my lists, it was brought ever more clear to me how important prioritization is. Because it's easy to feel a little overwhelmed as you get to that list of items and think about the number of hours in the day. So let's figure out why it's so important to focus on small wins, even in big tasks or activities like the ones I've listed and you have as well. I'm going to borrow and share with you some other folks' work in this territory because I think it really adds value to how we think about small wins. Don't lose your list, by the way. We will go back to it. So the first piece of work I want to share comes from authors published by the Harvard Business School in an article and then a book titled The Progress Principle. And in this work, the authors discuss what it is that makes a difference when small wins are celebrated and how important leaders are to that connection to celebrating wins along the way. So while you look down the left-hand side of the image in front of you, and it's very busy, the key pieces there are kind of what helps people have a good work life to get things done and make progress. So what's most important for performance is the sense that we are making progress on meaningful work. It goes very closely back to the heart of our flywheel, which is connecting people to purpose, worthwhile work, and making a difference. So as you think about what helps people to feel that, it's a combination of their emotions, their perceptions, and their motivations. What does worthwhile work or meaningful work mean to them? And so those are the elements of the employee experience that we're trying to focus on. And as a leader, you can see to the right, it talks about the roles that we can play and how we can be helpful in helping ourselves and others to celebrate the small wins that help us see we're making progress on meaningful work. So part of many of the things we do, and as you'll notice in the percentages, the more we do each of those things, the greater the percentage of good days that the employee or the team may feel. So progress and helping people understand the progress they're making is not an automatic experience. In fact, we can be helpful in defining both what a small win is, who is contributing what, and then getting obstacles out of the way so that people can continue forward movement. The same can be applied when leaders are even thinking of our own work, which is to say, how can I break down the larger work into small sections that we can celebrate? How do I pay attention to making sure I'm contributing what's most important for me to contribute? And when I confront obstacles, how am I maneuvering to remove them for myself and my team? There's tons of other good stuff here and in the book, but for today, the focus is really on thinking about our role for ourselves and our teams in creating those small wins. Another approach to thinking about why small wins make such a difference comes from a book called Essentialism, which years ago our team took on as a reading experience together, a book study. And this is not totally different, but just another way of thinking about how small wins can be helpful and why, especially perhaps in challenging times. So what typically we sometimes do in what this author would call a non-essentialist approach is we have a very awesome, meaningful goal, but it's pretty far out there. And the way in which we've defined it might make it feel like heroism is required to get there. So in other words, from where I sit in October of 2021 to perhaps my strategic goal in June of 2022 could feel very overwhelming because of the action required between now and then. Another approach to this is to know that that meaningful goal is out there, but think about the most minimal but viable progress to be made along the way that will get us there, and to stay focused on that minimal viable progress in a visual way so we can see that we are getting somewhere on a more frequent basis. Again, these things hopefully make a lot of sense, and at the same time, seeing them in different ways can sometimes be helpful. I have one last example that's very relevant and very recent for me. Last week, I spent a good amount of time hiking in the mountains, and I wanted to share how this came to pass for me, even in that experience. So one of the places, we were in the Adirondacks of New York, and we were hiking to some relatively low peaks. So please don't be surprised or consider me to be an ambitious mountain hiker. These were relatively small. But in one of them, while we were still at the ground level where we had started the trail, you could see where we were headed in that picture in the middle, Mount Van Hovenberg, with the granite sort of right at the top of the hill. And the moment that we paused and looked there, I'm not sure the picture captures how very distant it felt. And that was intimidating and a little bit overwhelming. And so what I discovered I started to do as I was hiking, especially as we started the uphill climb, was I was just looking to the next maybe cairn of rocks, or I was looking to one particularly significant tree that was up ahead, but clearly not at the mountaintop. Sometimes it was even just a rise in the land. And if I stayed focused on just that, maybe took a pause when I got to that point, it was much more manageable than remembering back to how it looked when I started from the ground. And to the far right is, of course, the view once we did make it to that small peak. And again, back to the goals as were stated in the last two, this was a really meaningful, beautiful, exciting opportunity to see from that level, but I certainly needed to break it down if I was going to persist as far as we did. So I want you to go back to your list. I think you've ended up with 7 to 10 kinds of things that are either taking your time, where you're spending your time currently, or perhaps where you'd like to be spending more time. And in order to have the opportunity to really break down what we are doing and aspire to assign some small benchmarks or milestones along the way, we probably can't do that with all 10 of those things on the list. So the prioritization comes in where you're looking at where your time is spent or you'd like it to be spent. And here's a couple of tools for prioritizing. You may be familiar with what's sometimes called the Eisenhower matrix. And as familiar as you may be, it can be applied all the time. So in this matrix, the idea is to think about how important or unimportant things are and how urgent or not urgent they are. And if you're a leader, you can know that many, many people will come to you with things that they believe are both important and urgent. And while some certainly are, not everything rises to the level of organizationally important and urgent. So as you're looking through your list, you might start to define for one or more of those tasks or actions, is this important or less important, urgent or less urgent? So I'll give you an example. One of the items that I had added to my list was developing an improved and continuously improving system for onboarding new members of our team. That is incredibly important. And because we are currently in the midst of it with some people, it's actually not as urgent because right now we've got to do what we're doing. But I'd very much like to plan how we will get to a systematic way to do that, which will take a lot more a lot more time and thought and participation and collaboration. At the same time, I'd also suggest that there are perhaps things that are not important but urgent, but maybe we don't need to be the person to do them. That's where delegation comes in, and the opportunity to think about, it is not perhaps something for me to do, but it does very much need to be done in a timely fashion. So with the Eisenhower matrix applied to some of the tasks on your list, I'm just going to pause again, not for too long, but for you to think about, are there some urgent and important things that stay there that you need to do and you need to do in a timely fashion? Are there some things that are important but not as urgent that maybe you would plan when you're going to tackle them? Anything that is not important but urgent that could be delegated. And then the hardest part of this chart or this matrix to me is always that the not important or not urgent need to come off the list. Now that does come with the importance of communicating the change in priorities, but certainly an opportunity for you to think about that. So pause for a moment with your list and consider urgency and importance. The next two ideas or strategies I'll share are kind of related because they're the same but going in different directions. So again, looking at the list of the things you are doing or want to do, many of us who are educators have been trained in what was once called backwards planning or backwards mapping, which is to say, where do I want to be in the long term? And then backing that forward to, so what would I have to do from today till then? This is helpful both in terms of prioritizing what exactly needs to occur, but also in giving us the opportunity for small wins. Because if we do have a map of where we want to be in a day, in a week, in a month, every one of those is an opportunity for celebration. So as an example, when I looked at this and I thought about, I need to start delegating some responsibility for important tasks, I might look out 1 month and say, content planning and another project going on our team need to be delegated. So that's where I'd like to be a month out. Thinking backwards, probably I'm going to have to talk with some folks who are going to take new responsibility. And then I actually thought about, well, in the next week, what am I really going to be able to do? And in the next day, I realized, gosh, I'm already doing something related to the project of our webinars and content events. So it's possible for you to think about one of your actions or one of your current tasks and define, where would I like to be? You probably already know where you'd like to be, maybe by the end of the academic year or the calendar year. But split that in half. Where do I want to be halfway to that from here? Or where in a month? Or where in a week? Or sometimes, as you start your day, what is it I would want to accomplish today? The other option that is kind of the contrast of the backwards mapping is more thinking one step at a time. And while we're often encouraged to do that, I do think many of us have strategic brains that are constantly thinking of all the next steps. So instead of going further out and coming back, you could always go the opposite direction. You know your big chunks. Maybe it's a daily or a weekly practice of what will I accomplish tomorrow in this area? And maybe not every day has something in every area. Given that these are the things you both have to and want to spend time on, they will fluctuate on a daily or weekly basis, for sure. So if I just think about tomorrow, I took my original list plus my added list. And as you can see, I came up with a couple that I'm not going to do anything on tomorrow. They're more of those, if you remember from the matrix, the planning stage. There may also be no requirement to do something on them. So they don't have an action within a day. But there are others that have significant things that need to be accomplished perhaps in the next day. And so thinking of this as a way to prioritize over the next 24 hours or week, what is it I want to get accomplished in this direction can also be productive. It's especially helpful if you aren't entirely sure what the path from today to the longer term goal is going to look like. So in that case, it might be a waste of energy to think all the way to the end. It may be best to think of the one next thing that I want to get accomplished. That's also helpful when your time is perhaps challenged, when there are things that are going to come up that will interrupt your nice plan as you see listed here. Then maybe having just the one next step feels less overwhelming and gives you an opportunity to celebrate. So with an example like this, at the end of the day, there's an opportunity for me to recognize the small wins and be ready to say, okay, then what is the next step? And that's another way to think about prioritization. Certainly, we want to make sure that we expand what we've just been talking about as a personal practice or habit to others. And I would encourage you to think about, as you've been thinking about how you would break your work into smaller portions and celebrate, do other people know what it is you're expecting in those windows of time? Do people need to know what should not be on the urgent or important list? When you think about other tools you use, like a scorecard or a strategic plan or a weekly sort of map of the week, do they accurately reflect what you're talking about today? And how often should you check in to see if there's a win to celebrate? Again, being explicit about what's most important on the list for others is also critical, so they're not surprised when you choose to focus on one priority rather than another. And lastly, probably the hardest thing to accomplish while perhaps simplest in thinking, is to actually celebrate the wins. And that can look different for all sorts of different reasons. I currently have a journal that encourages me to color in a star if I've made it through my priorities at the end of the day. Other people may want to be more public, maybe want to message the team or make it visible. So there's something you can track on a bulletin board or in a meeting agenda so you can see that progress. Don't assume that everyone knows the value of a small win when you're working or leading a team. Very often you'll be proud, but if you haven't communicated that, others may be thinking we're still out in the wilderness, not sure whether we're making progress. And always, as you're celebrating, make sure the connection back to that meaningful work is there. It's not just good that I took a step in onboarding a new coach because I took a step in on. It's good because that means she will be ever more ready to help more people faster. And that's our meaningful work and why we're connected to it. With those ideas and the opportunity, hopefully, to do a little bit of reflection, I am grateful for your time with me today. And I certainly hope that this has helped you to think about how to make continuous improvement happen. Thank you.